Thanks for joining me in the sandbox. I'm April Dawn Patterson, and I invite you to play with me and my guest today, KP. Well, in the first segment, we pop into a virtual coffee house before hitting the sandbox. And being the benevolent host that I am, your order's on me. So, what order do you give the barista?
I am caffeine free right now, but I really love chai. So if there's a caffeine free chai or like a turmeric tea.
You got it. Well, now that you have your beverage, let's dive right in. This next segment is called I Think I Know You From Somewhere. So I figured that this would work out well for me to just have you introduce yourself and kind of include in there some of the things that we might have seen you from or know your work.
Yeah, I actually forgot about this part, so I didn't really think about it ahead of time. But I think the most visible part of my life is filmmaking and poetry. I have made a lot of films as a producer, director. I've helped out with crafty, that kind of thing. In 2020, my first feature film was premiered online, obviously, which is a very strange experience. I had a lot of text coming to me while it was playing live through a film festival called Dances with Films out of LA. That was really wonderful. And I had people send me video recordings of like, oh, like what they noticed about the film, but it wasn't in person. So that's kind of something I'm craving in the future, is to screen that movie in front of people and hear the laughter, hear the sighs and kind of thing like that. Um, my poetry also is online and in some anthologies. My first poetry collection was published in 2019 by VA Press out of Milwaukee. That was a really great experience. What else? I'm also a teacher. That's definitely the most public expression of my life. Is I teach in university settings for self kind of created containers for writers to create community. In November every year, it'll be the third year this year, I lead a poem-vember, is what I call it, because I got a little jealous of the novel writers from
Mhm.
NaNoWriMo with the National Novel Writing Month. So I was like, what if we write a poem every day? And it's super exhausting and terrible, and no one writes a poem every day, but it's really fun. We have a Discord chat. We gas each other up by putting emojis on each other's poems, and I try to offer a prompt every day or like something to think about or a poem to respond to. So that's a pretty public way that you might know me. And then coming up this fall, I'm doing a more concerted or intimate container where we meet weekly for 7 weeks straight, a really small group of writers who give really close feedback. And we read a book every week and we discuss what we're seeing in that book and write in response to that book. So that's coming up. It's called Lyric Threads Lab, September 8th to October 20th. And I'm really looking forward to that kind of experience where we get to see each other's faces and voices while writing and sharing.
Very cool. And towards the end of our time together, I'll give you another opportunity to provide your website and other places that people can connect with you, maybe get on your newsletter, so forth, so they can stay up to date. But what are the names of your movies like, and how could we check them out?
Yeah, the feature is called Ringolevio, which is named after a children's game from the Bronx that's spelled Ringo like the Beatle, and then Levio is Levio. My other films, I produced and supported the narrative building of a documentary called My First and Last Film. It's not my first and last film, but it is the director's first and last film. It's an incredible character study of someone who's making their first film in their 60s and also actively grieving the person they were previously making the film with, who was their boyfriend who passed from a very rare and sudden disease. And I highly recommend the movie. It's gorgeous. So that's my first and last film, and they're all on Amazon and Tubi and stuff like that.
Very cool. Well, guests are asked to choose a word or phrase that they would like to hear used more often in everyday conversation, something that doesn't get nearly enough airtime. So, the prior guest chose for you the word groundedness. Groundedness. So, you are tasked to try to somehow fit that into our conversation today. And you also get to choose a word for the next guest to dance with. And it could be a peculiar word that you find funny or just something that's resonating with you right now. So, what word are you laying down for them to pick up?
I I chose the word pleasure for its complex relationship in lots of our lives and how I have a history of finding that word really silly coming out of my mouth, though it's one of the most important experiences of our human life. So I just like to hear that word used more and not necessarily a taboo way.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. I'm curious then, your fifth house in your natal chart, what sign is that in?
It's Taurus, and
Okay.
April already knows this, but I had been using a completely different house system twice recently, and I was recently initiated into whole sign house system. And so it's been shifting between Gemini and Taurus, and grappling with Taurus, kind of the sign of pleasure too, has been a really interesting thing to grapple with. It's grappling is the word right now.
Mm. Do you have any challenging planets in that house then, or?
I have no placements. The ruling planet Venus is in Scorpio in my 11th, so it's like opposite. Though it doesn't necessarily feel opposite to Taurus to me because it's in that 11th house, which I see as very pleasurable with people and
Right.
community. Yeah, those Scorpio, I do have a difficulty of keeping it light in
Mm.
communities. I like to find the deeply emotional and explorative kind of community. So that's the Scorpio.
Gotcha. All right. You said pleasure. Okay, I think that's a great word for the next person. The next person that I'm interviewing is Monty, and I connected with her through Holisticism Hub. So I'll just bring that up. I think that's how you and I connected. Holisticism Hub, they have a free community and you join, and then every Friday they have what's called Free Offering Friday, where incredible people post their free offerings. And what you did is you had an astrology reading that you were offering to like the first two people that took you up on it. And so I emailed you and I was like, this sounds incredible. I would love an astrology reading. If perhaps, I didn't make the cut for the first two people, I would still love to connect with you and can have you on my podcast or whatever. I ended up getting astrology reading, and you haven't asked for this plug, but it was like one of the most incredible. You described it as soulful, and I totally agree. It was an incredible reading. I loved it. And I explained to someone here recently, you know how often we look at challenging parts of our chart as, okay, I'm just going to take lemons and make lemonade from it. But the way that you
Yeah.
phrased it, they weren't even lemons to begin with. They were a freaking superpower. And it's not like, let's take this bad thing and try to make the most we can out of it. It was like, oh wow, you have this gift that's in these dark houses. And I was like, oh my gosh, wow, I never saw it that way before. And I really appreciated that gift of seeing it in a completely different lens. And I've had a lot of astrology readings before. And so it's not very often that I'm just completely blindsided by something, but you would say something. I'm like, wait a moment. What in my chart is telling you that? Or what are these symbols that are speaking to you? And you just have this very eloquent way of interpreting the symbols and putting it together in a very meaningful way. And I know I have not filled out my testimonial form yet, but I'm hopeful I will do that. But I'm also hopeful that this podcast in its own way spreads your wonders abroad to everyone at large. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, I have to say that every reading teaches me another facet
Mm.
of the universe. But yeah, I felt like so fed that you allowed me in, that we can actually go deeper layers and talk about certain aspects. And that was really wonderful. In the reading, I think I said I'm envious of your placements as a writer because of the ability to see things in a more intricate or complicated, complex way is what I was looking at. And like that must feed your writing, your thinking so much.
What you were seeing is an ability to really drop into a character from someone else's perspective. And I brought up the
Yeah.
fact that in my novelette that I wrote, I toggle between different perspectives, between that of the hero and the villain, and how that was challenging, but it was
Ah,
actually really interesting. And I'm glad I ended up getting that nudge and following it through and doing it, because it was a lot more fulfilling than if I had tried to make the whole book simply just, I don't know, from one perspective. It would have been, it's a lot more
ah,
nuanced this way, I think. But
absolutely.
so yeah, we connected through the free offering Friday. I took you up on the astrology reading, and it was incredible. So I wanted to introduce you to even more people, and let's talk about your poetry. When did you start writing poetry, and how important is community to the writing process? I think that's one of the big things I want to ask you.
Yeah, I have kind of a boring origin story when it comes to writers because it's kind of just like what I have been doing in my life, and I can't remember how it began. I know for sure in middle school I was writing a lot of poetry, specifically poetry. I was just always a reader and a writer as a kid. I had a lot of difficulty with reading, and I can try to posit why, but reading long form novels, textbooks, stuff like that was really difficult for me. So I think that's another reason why poetry was kind of my entry. I also have a dad who's a reader. He, in many iterations of his life, has been a speaker, writer, that kind of thing as well, though he was a firefighter most of the time. So he introduced me to a lot of writers at a young age, specifically Robert Frost. I remember like when I was 9, maybe, and then Cummings. He bought me one of his books or he showed me a book that he had. So that, I mean, my dad is a very big influence in my life, as dads usually are. And we often talk about poetry still. He was really encouraging me to enter my MFA old. I was a little bit older than some of the other people in the program, but he sent me a Mary Oliver poem the day that I told him I applied, and then the day I found out I got in. 2 different Mary Oliver poems. So it was really nice. So that's like my origin story of writing. The community aspect is what I was craving for so long. And I had a lot of great community, but it wasn't until my MFA, I graduated 1 year ago. It wasn't until my MFA where I really, when you're in the environment of, it was almost 50 people who are all there to learn about writing, practice writing, discuss writing. I didn't know what a lyric essay was, though I had been reading them and I loved them. That was one of my favorite things to read. I thought it was just a prose poem that was in section or something like that.
Mhm.
But Erica Bauer, who was in my cohort, she used the phrase lyric essay. And then I could search for it online. I'm getting really heated right now because I could search lyric essay online and find even more. That kind of element of someone just dropping something that didn't seem that important to them to know gave me so much more potential. And just getting close to people and really hearing why they're writing a certain way or what they're writing about or what they want to be writing about, but they're not quite getting it, that kind of thing. To be in that constant conversation in a group and not just one other person was so transformative, which is another reason why I'm creating this virtual mini version of it. Obviously, it's not the same as a 50-person, everyone's busy running around talking kind of energy. That's the intimacy is what I'm craving to create again. Before my MFA, I wrote in small groups. I have a couple heart friends who are incredible poets that like I would consider more family than poets in my life, but they teach me with what they write and send to me all the time. And that just, it's motivating, it's enlightening. It makes me feel so excited by this one line that Annie Grizzle writes about the sidewalk. And it's like, what if I wrote about the sidewalk and I just write for hours about sidewalks because she wrote that one line. Maybe that's my Venus in Scorpio in the 11th house speaking too. I get so much energy when I'm in community as a writer, which is a very isolating or isolated activity sometimes.
It
So yeah,
definitely can
that's
be.
my long answer.
No, I
What
love
was
that.
that?
I said it definitely can feel very isolating, like a very solo process. So, yeah, I love you building that sense of community around it. And this is the first time I'm hearing about your poetry offerings. So I will definitely be listening in to how to like connect with you. I know I have your email address, obviously, but I'll be figuring out how I can maybe get inside these circles because I love writing poetry. I had self-published my first collection and I just felt like the second book I wanted to find a publisher for, a traditional publisher. I think it was just something important for me to be able to do is go through a traditional publisher for this second collection. And now it's been so long that I think I just want to start writing. I just want an opportunity to start writing again, whether or not it sees the light of day outside that group or not, but just being able to share with each other what's lighting us up is it feels important
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah. I should also say the 2 years of my MFA, I was constantly crying out of joy and sorrow because of the regular rate of feeling so deeply with other people, reading people's poetry that much, that closely, and getting to know them just made me feel the intensity of being a human to the point where I could not do an MFA again because it was so many feelings. And then I think it took about 6 months afterward, which was about a year ago, where I was like, oh, I'm a regular human again. Like I'm not constantly thinking about joy and suffering. Yeah. But the richness of being allowed into other people's processes and their interior life is such a gift that you have to earn, and part of earning that is being equally dedicated to your work in their presence. So that's, yeah, I highly recommend that kind of experience for writers.
When you're talking about that equally invested or committed, that's definitely how I see the ability to build trust is that you have
Yeah.
to sometimes it's great to have someone to just witness you and you need that container to be witnessed but also it just adds even that much more to have someone else who's giving an equal measure and just as committed to sharing and excavating with you as you are. So I think, yeah, that's really cool. Do you find yourself drawn to a certain genre of like any certain topic or subject matter when you write your poems?
For genre, it's a difficult question to answer. One of the reasons I chose the MFA program that I went to Eastern Washington is because they encouraged cross-pollination. Because I've written two full novels that are not going to ever be read by anyone because
Okay.
they just needed to be written. I write plays, screenplays. I'm currently writing a novel in verse. I like the agility and the challenge of, okay, who's my speaker? Who am I speaking to? In what way am I speaking? What's my message? I also taught rhetoric. I love the form kind of challenge. I am a Capricorn-rising. I think that's important to say. So being able to step into different shapes is really part of the joy for me. What I write about, how I approach my poetry, I feel like I just finished my most recent collection this summer. Finish is a bad word. So I feel like I started writing this collection 4 years ago. At first, I was so extremely disconnected from my body. And I knew that, but I didn't know how not to be. So I was writing through the questions. And then I was like researching yoga, breathwork, dance, pleasure, everything I could. I was researching and then writing about it and fighting it and all that stuff. And then I feel like by the end of writing this collection, I honestly feel so connected to my body. Like I think why I write, it's how I can tangibly or visibly see me working toward what I desire and feeling it. So I don't know what my next project will be, and maybe I'll always be writing about being connected to my body, but I just feel so wonderful that I can feel through the complex nature of body, mind, soul negotiation and how that really never is resolved or it never stays put. But at least now I have more understanding of how I can get back to my body. If I know I'm not in my body, I know how to get back. So the poems may not be obviously about that, but I'm writing through my ancestors, contemplating how the people who brought my family to America got here, what they did, why they chose, I'm in Wisconsin, why they chose Wisconsin. Did it look like Scotland or Norway, that kind of thing? And to me, that is talking about the body. I write a lot about how we don't see the land as a living being. So I'm trying to use the word her or him or they when I'm talking about the land and trees and stuff like that. So it's like every poem is I'm trying to reshape my consciousness to include my physical experience and honoring the land that is physically holding us. Yeah.
I loved what you said about asking questions, because I feel as though poetry or writing generally can be a very brave experience. Of course, it can be superficial, but it can also be very brave when we start approaching that inner frontier and asking questions, because that's kind of scary. Because what if the answer is not that thing that you want it to be? Or so sometimes we don't even ask questions because we just want to have a blind eye to something, or just assume it's going to work out, or trying to make everything externally look the way that we have this expectation from others that it should look like. And so I think,
Wow.
keywords being excavating and asking questions and using writing, specifically poetry, as that tool is really, really powerful. And I think it's sometimes a very brave thing to do.
Yeah. And what you're saying too is like there were a few moments where it was really difficult to see what I was doing. I was noticing I was dehumanizing like people or living things or things that weren't living, but I was not treating them like they existed. I try not to be too afraid of what will come up. I also don't have to publish the darkest things or the hardest things that I'm discovering, though I try to, because what if someone else is experiencing a similar excavation?
Mhm.
Maybe that could be a poem for them.
So we are going to take a break. And when we come back, KP is going to read us one of her poems. Well, KP, before we go into your poem, I did want to talk about astrology again, because it was such an impactful encounter. You were saying that you had changed from a different house system to whole sign house. And that was because you took a Hellenistic course through Nightlight Astrology, right?
It happened before,
Oh,
but
okay.
definitely it informed me wanting to jump into Adam Elbas's Nightlight Astrology Year One course, because my experience with astrology was evolutionary, archetypal, more it was modern basically astrology. But I was just reading more about ancient and Arabic astrological techniques, and I just felt more aligned with those systems and the technological side, but also the interpretations and how everything lines up with the way of nature. And so does modern astrology and other methods of astrology, but it just felt more, it felt right. Though I still feel a little like, oh no, I don't want to commit. And then a year and a half ago, I felt very convicted. I switched from Placidus to equal sign. And I was like, this is my house system, and here's why. And so I was already kind of bouncing around, but I had been using Placidus since I was a kid, basically, thinking I had an eighth house sun, and I do not. It's one of the reasons why whole sign was like, oh yeah, in the most literal ways, this is my experience, though I've kind of avoided and I have a 10th house sun, Mercury and Mars. I've avoided that association with career, vocation, that being so important in my life. But I think it might be more obvious that how I spend my life and what I put effort toward in this life is pretty visible
It's
as an
your
artist. So
communication and your words. It's
yeah,
all pretty public. Can you tell me what does astrology, what has it meant to you? For you to have like put so much time and effort into it, I just want to hear your personal buy-in into astrology. So that's one question, but then there was another question I wanted to ask before I completely forget. And I would think that was just a comment I wanted to make. You were talking about how, you don't want to quite commit. And I love that because I can relate, because I just know how certain I felt about things growing up, the way I believed, and my dogma, my belief system. And I just knew that that was truth with a capital T. And as
Mm.
much as I've changed and evolved and learned, I am not to the point where I will ever say I have arrived, because I know how certain I felt
Right.
at one point in my life, and that was not where I ended up. So I will say this is my current truth, and I won't put myself into a box. This is how I'm going to believe forever or whatever. I'm allowing myself to evolve, to learn. And so I just wanted to speak to that, what you were saying about, yeah, even though I've made this switch, I'm not going to put myself in this box as though it's the end all be all.
I mean, I kind of do feel like whole sign is where I'll land
I think so
forever.
too.
So
Yeah.
funny
I
to
think
say
I
after
was
you're
just
saying,
extrapolating that to larger archetypes in life. But yeah, I feel like whole sign is where I'm gonna stay forever too. But
yeah. And it doesn't matter if it's not true because every system is holy in its own way. It's like
yes,
it's just a
I
different
agree.
system to look at the same thing. If we didn't have astrology, if we weren't tracking the movements of the planets and how it's affecting life or activity for humanity, for nature, we would be looking at something else as a correlative sign meaning making system.
Meaning make,
And
I love that. Yes, whether it's reading tea leaves
yeah,
or a
I was
birding
just gonna
trail.
say tea leaves. Yeah. I was
Yeah.
literally just gonna say tea leaves, but that I didn't want to be disrespectful because I like tea leaves also are like they give you signifiers to look at.
Mm.
Yeah. Anyway, so going back, my buy-in with astrology, it's kind of like the same origin story with reading and writing for me. I think I was 9 when I started learning about the zodiac signs, and I was fascinated. And it was middle school when I started really connecting it with friends who I was in conflict with. Middle school energy. Why is that person fighting with this person? It's a Leo and an Aries. So of course,
Drama.
like that kind of thing, the most the most fundamental interpretations. And then I feel like the 20s, when you're in your 20s, it's one of the hardest decades of your life, though I will never necessarily know that because I've only experienced 3 so far. Then I got much deeper into the intricacies of the chart. So I do think it's a desire to gain intimacy or understanding of humans who have so many variables and are ever changing. Any given moment, someone could be motivated by something new. So that's where the astrology comes, my fascination with it. But it was not until 2 years ago I felt this calling to become devoted and to treat astrology with so much responsibility, ethical responsibility. That's when I stopped party tricking astrology. It felt like, oh, do you want to look at your chart? What's your moon sign? And just being, I don't think I was ever flippant with it, but I was excited to give information and to start a conversation that way. But 2 years ago, I was like, no, I really want to treat this like an ethical practice and how I access my own humanity and mirror humanity back to other people. So that's like really felt it was post Saturn return, but it was in that integration period after Saturn return where yeah, and also as a Capricorn rising, I think that I was just being called to practice what I want to see all around the world with my politicians and my teachers and my parents. I want that level of solemnity and ethical consideration. Yeah. So it really shifted 2 years ago for me from curiosity of the human psyche to how I want to act in my life.
One of the things, if you could elaborate on, I was just blown away by your grasp of astrology and like who were your teachers. And you're like, yeah, I had these teachers, but I'm largely just self-taught. And if you would speak to that whole, I'm trying to remember the exact words, that punk rock approach to learning. I loved that. Tell me more about this punk rock approach to life.
Yeah, that's a phrase. I was talking to my friend about you actually. You said that I had an incredible grasp on astrology. I texted my friend Chelsea Owens, who's like an art therapist, artist, mystic, someone you go to for wisdom, but also joy. She's just so fun. I was like, how do I tell her that I'm self-taught? I feel so weird about this. And then also I was like, of course, people who are self-taught, that doesn't mean that you don't have a foundation. I messaged you about this. But her first response is, well, of course, this is your punk rock education. We're here for that. And the way that I think both Chelsea and I mean that is punk rock means you're always checking with your authenticity or with your gut if something feels right,
Yeah.
and always questioning if something doesn't feel right. And when I receive information from astrology, maybe through a podcast or whatever offerings, beautiful, like I have so many astrologers that I follow, crave their poetry basically. Alice Sparkly Cat is one of my gurus, though I've never met them and I'll probably never will, but they are such an incredible writer, and everything they've written about astrology, I check against my own gut and what I know about the world to be capital T or lower T true. And I gather the information and check it against all the other astrologers over time, like in reading books. And it's like, that doesn't necessarily feel right. Like all the gendered astrology books, like highly gendered astrology books that I read that were written in the 60s and 70s, I always kind of took it. I took what resonated and what didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I read a lot of books that were written in the 60s and 70s in my early 20s that didn't necessarily feel great when it came to how we talked about relationships or how we talked about child rearing. I forgot what book that was, but there's a specific astrology book about how to raise a Libra child or something like that. And it felt like not great parenting advice, actually. So I've always really questioned everything I've read about astrology.
I love that punk rock is one very authentic. You're bringing that authenticity when you're keeping it boots on the ground level. Like it's,
Yeah.
you're checking in with yourself. And yeah, the other thing that's coming to me with the punk rock approach is that it keeps it accessible. I was very much alive during the 90s. I was an 80s kid. So in the 90s, yeah, it felt like that dream of becoming a star, that grunge star, it was possible. You just had to have friends get together and rock out in your garage. So it was very much locally sourcing. I feel like sometimes nowadays it's more like everyone needs to be the lead singer. I don't know
Yeah.
why this is coming
Yeah.
up, but the garage band, it's this knowing that it's all of us. It wouldn't be the same band without this drummer or whoever. It would
Yeah.
not be the same group. And at the same time, it feels very accessible. Oh yeah, we have some drum set and we have a microphone. We can do it. And this is not to throw any shade, but some programs or teachers are just priced out of accessibility from some students, hence why sometimes people do learn from books or online and free resources. So I just love keeping it true, like with that authenticity and constantly checking in and not outsourcing your truth to someone else that's air quotes an expert or the guru,
Right.
and keeping it accessible. Because I think sometimes when we have this ideal where we have it outside of ourselves, we're like, okay, well, I don't have the tools to approach it or to really know it or become familiar with it. When any type of meaning making tool, like we were talking about, whether it's tarot or astrology, whatever you're using to explore soul and self, I think it's very much intrinsically, it should be motivated to connect on that level as opposed to trying to become or look like something else.
Yes. Yes. I love that you use the word guru. Like punk rock is resistant to the guru because we are our own, like we know what's true to us. And we don't want to be like anyone else, though it feels so good to be in the spirit with other people. So like you're saying with the get in a band, doesn't necessarily matter who is singing or drumming, it's that you're doing it and you're feeling the energy.
Yeah.
I did want to say that your comment about priced out is something I think about a lot. And I feel like I was punk rocking poetry for a long time until I kind of took the plunge with like an academic setting MFA, which absolutely prices people out. I was lucky that my tuition was funded in exchange for teaching, but not many people can take 2 years of their life to do that. The price of time as well. So I'm back to punk rocking it and it feels good. And then Adam Allenboss of Nightlight Astrology, he offers, I forgot how he phrases it, but subsidized or much lower rate,
He does.
but like financial assistance,
Mhm.
which is like, he backs up he also feels very punk rock to me where he's like, this should be available to as many people as possible. So that's also why I was attracted to his class. Anyway, yeah, I have a poem. We were talking earlier about the lyric essay and how I like to play with form. This is formed in a way that looks like a prose poem. It takes up a whole page in the way that I think a poem is a poem, but it's kind of like a short story, maybe.
Well, you would know because
So
you have the
I'll
MFA.
the jury's
You
out for
can
what
say whatever it is, and I wouldn't know. I'd be like, yes.
I think that's why I'm attracted to the lyric essay because nobody can settle on what the form is. It's so exciting. Do you want me to share it like my screen or just want me to read?
Well, let's share your screen, I guess.
Okay.
Since you're offering, let's do it that way.
You can see my messy document title.
Yes.
Okay. It's called I Saw That I Was a Kiwi Bird. I saw that I was a kiwi bird with paper masking me to appear as a mallard duck. And over time, it became a mallard duck. It was easy as allowing the soft air to hold a piece of paper of the long green neck of a duck up to my kiwi beak. Everyone could see that I was a kiwi bird with a 2D duck facade. But it became truer and truer. My bone structure and my musculature reconfigured. It wasn't a falseness. It was as simple as becoming. I wondered if I was losing something essential by relinquishing the kiwi in me. But I could feel I wanted to be a duck anyhow. Ducks have families. Ducks are everywhere, all over the world. Ducks have progeny. Ducks have so many progeny that we don't concern ourselves with making sure they're fucking and remaking themselves. Is it terrible to remake oneself? Is it terrible to continue the organic matter of oneself into other beings? Tell me you don't want any more swans, and I'll tell you I once watched a swan strike a real-life cartoon metal trash can lid held up and hoisted by a zoo employee who was being driven by another zoo employee in a golf cart. They had done this many times before. The dumb swan had wandered too far into the walking areas and was poking at children. Now the swan was to be led back to its pond, but the most efficient way was to make target of a clattering pain. The swan can't resist beating on it, beaking it with the aggression of an overtired child. So tell me you wouldn't stay back and watch too, the slow and satisfying dance of the zoo person smilelessly leading the swan away. But I turned around and saw my friends were already down at the elephant exhibit. I had to do a terrible run to catch up with them, or I could decide to take my time and waddle back. I knew only certain things could be said when I wasn't near enough to hear them. Only certain transmissions are forged in my absence. And so did I waddle, every so often looking back to see if I was a point equidistant to the swan and his trash lore, and my friends possibly sharing factoids on the living, possibly asking questions about the dead. Possibly I am the swan, and wouldn't you want me to be multiplied as long as I promise not to attack an innocent toddler because I'm feeling so tall-necked and so pretty?
Mm. Yeah, that's a poem.
It's a poem.
Yeah, I'm curious. I started like a Pinterest board of different definition of what is poetry. For you, what is
Mhm.
poetry?
Oof.
Right?
Oh,
That's
that
why it requires a
question
whole
is
Pinterest
so hard.
board.
Right. And I think the even harder question is, why do you write poetry? Like, it's, it's the most human thing. It's one of the most human expressions. It's been something that all humans have done forever. Even if you don't consider yourself a creative person, you have at least spoken a poem without knowing it, or knowing it. Poetry is, oh, I can't remember the Lord quote, but I'm not going to try. But like the distillation of a moment of urgency. That's what someone smarter than I have said. Yeah, I can't answer that question. That's why defining a lyric essay versus a lyric poem is so impossible, because poetry can be in a word, it can be in two words, it might require many words. Yeah, I don't know.
Well,
I
one of
just
the
know
things
I want to keep doing it.
one of the things I would like to do, Oak Moon Tarot. She has this incredible practice on her Instagram of pulling cards for different poems and quotes and pieces of art. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to follow in her footsteps and pull a tarot card to see what some extra insight might be into the poem you just read for us. So I don't know how do you pull tarot cards? Because some people have so many different methods of what card feels right to you. What do you do?
It depends. If I'm reading for someone else, I like to shuffle until cards fly out, so it's more insistent. But this morning I pulled for myself, and it was kind of just like a yes or no question. And I just fanned it, picked one. It was very quickly chosen, but it's
Mm.
because I'm connected with myself. So it changes. Yeah.
Well, what I usually do is I just kind of like face down, like close my eyes often, and then I will just kind of thumb through them until I feel like this expansiveness in my chest, like, oh, that's the one. So give me just one moment. Okay, let's see what this card is. Six of Wands. And I'm pulling from the Tarot of Curious Creatures. So yes, let me read and see what the guidebook to that has to say. While we're doing that, do you have any correlations that are coming up for you already?
Yeah. When I shared earlier that the collection that I think is finished, it was kind of a process. This was one of those poems where it felt like, oh, I really am understanding what it means to become or change, but get closer to myself and my nature. So,
Six of Wands. Okay, victory, celebrating success, a homecoming. I love that word,
mm,
homecoming. Being seen, accomplishments and victories, public recognition, influence, optimism, inspiring others. Very cool. That being seen
yeah,
part, I think that speaks to your poem as far as it starts off with the whole mask thing and being seen and like, who am I?
mhm.
Am I this thing that I want to be or that I was? Maybe there are no clear answers, but being seen for who you're becoming and who you are. So, how can people find out more about you and follow what you're making in your own sandbox?
In a more like community way, it's that Lyric Threads Lab that I'm really excited about launching. My goal is to have it be a fall and spring experience, but I don't know how it's going to shape. The first one starts September 8th, and it's every Sunday for 7 weeks. And I'm asking people to apply with their writing just so I can get a sense of their vibe,
Mhm.
because I want to keep it small. It's going to be 6 to 10 writers, and I want to choose people that can mesh well with each other. It's not necessarily to select people by the type of writing they do, because I do like to have an expansive view of aesthetic and style. So that was on my website. kpkaszub.com is my website. kpkaszzu.com.
Lovely.
The other stuff I do, it's kind of long haul things. Like I am very slowly writing a novel that hopefully is finished soon. So I'm stepping into looking for a publisher phase, but I feel really, really excited about what I think I'm going to be writing next.
Okay, can you give us a
Yeah.
little hint? Like, what is it about? Just
Yeah, I've been reading all of Rachel Cusk's books. I love her writing style. I love how it's bending the subjective, objective kind of sense. She often writes in voices, and the main character isn't necessarily experienced, though it's the main character's observations and hearing these people talk that is so fascinating to me. So what I want to explore is self-reliance, the concept, the origin story of America's self-reliance, but in a way that relates to our sexuality and the intricacies of intimacy sexually and non-sexually, and then having people's voices speak their experiences through a novel. So that's what I'm working on next.
well, I love how in the Lifestylist podcast, Luke Story ends his pods asking his guests this question. So I loved it so much that I included it in all of mine as well. Who have been 3 teachers or teachings in your life that you might share with our audience that they could go research and also learn from?
The first teaching, I think, came to me through a lot of sources, but it wasn't until a teacher sat me down and made me feel it and practice it that I fully understood its importance. Her name was Haripriya. I was in a yin yoga teacher certification, and she noticed that I keep my breath in the high part of my chest and I don't breathe into my belly. And she said that emotion, well, many people said, but she made me know that that means I'm keeping anxiety, anger, pressure, those difficult emotions close to my experience at all times. And she sat with me for hours over the course of like 5 days and helped me get into a rhythm where I would naturally breathe into my stomach and then let it out fully and that kind of thing. And she showed me that I could feel peace, calm. I can go through more difficult moments with that base level of breath, the biofeedback component. It was extremely confronting, and I felt so much shame. And she was the perfect level of gentle, encouraging, but also really stark,
Clear.
strict with me.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that is a teaching that I try to fold into everything I do. And a lot of my astrology readings often bring up the breath, I think, because of that. Because I know that it's so important to our existence. And obviously I am not perfect. I don't know if I've breathed into my belly all day, but after this recording, for sure, I'll practice that again. So that's a major teaching. The second teaching, I have a really great friend who was at first my teacher in clinical hypnosis and EFT tapping. She taught me so many things, but I have on my desktop an image of her on a beach where she scooted the phrase, "let it be easy." And it's taken from afar where you can read all of it. And I look at that every single day as a reminder of you can do really difficult things over time. But if it doesn't feel like the easiest path or the path with the most energy flow, it's probably not the path you should take. And also, life doesn't have to be hard. It shouldn't be hard. So that's a great lesson that she's given me amongst millions of other lessons. Let it be easy. Just let it be easy.
Did you want to share her name as well, or just that teaching?
Oh yeah, Jenna Knapp. She's an incredible artist. She at one point taught hypnosis, EFT, neuro-linguistic programming. Yeah, she's incredible. She herself is a wisdom keeper too. And then the third teacher, it's not difficult to find teacher or teachings in my life. It was difficult to choose three.
Mm.
And I'm choosing Ross Gay as a teacher, and specifically his poem, Catalog of Unabashed Gratitude. If you have not experienced that poem, please read it or listen to him read it, because his voice puts so much energy into each line. And that poem taught me, as a human and a writer, the importance of seeing joy and gratitude as complex and difficult to hold sensations or emotions. And he does such an incredible job of connecting sorrow and mercy with joy and gratitude and weaving them together. And that poem and his writing, most of his writing in general, just teaches me to emphasize joy and gratitude and accept difficult aspects of them. Where I think that I was avoiding joy and gratitude before I read his work, because it felt too easy or too light or something that wasn't gritty enough for me.
Mm.
But he showed me the grit in gratitude and joy in that. So I don't know if I said that eloquently enough, but I'm just so grateful that he has written what he has written, and he keeps writing.
Well, KP, I want to thank you so much for joining me in the sandbox. And until next time, much love to you.
Thank you so much. It's so nice to connect with you.